Good evening, everyone. I'm Sarah Whiting. I'm your dean. Welcome. So a quick reminder that we have live captioning available this evening for our virtual and also our in-person audience. If you're in person, you just use the QR code and you get the captions. And for our Zoom audience or our webinar audience, you go to the bottom, the CC icon, and you'll get the captioning there. Please visit the AV booth and talk to Matt if you have any questions. So our event this evening is to celebrate Germane Barnes as the winner of the 2021 Wheelwright Prize. We'll have time for Q&A with Germane afterwards. But we also hope that you'll join us to continue the discussion tomorrow afternoon at 12:30 p.m. Germane will be in conversations with the members of the Wheelwright Prize jury, Mark Lee, David Brown, David Hart, Megan Panzano, and Sumaya Valley, who are all here with us tonight. And if you all can, conveniently sitting in the front row, if you all can stand up, please, that we can thank you for your work on the jury. Yes, you do have to stand up. I asked you to. And I'll note, I was also a member of the jury, that this is a really fabulous team to work with. And so, Germane, we had a lot of fun doing this with you and for you. Some additional announcements. So this week marks the release of Democracy in Urban Form, which is a new book that features a series of lectures that sociologist Richard Sennett gave at the GSD in 1981. Ken Stewart found these lectures and realized that they have incredible nuggets of information. And so he worked with Richard to edit the lectures, revise the lectures, and publish this small book that's coming out this week. And so on this Wednesday, the political philosopher, Harvard professor Michael Sandel will deliver a lecture here in Piper at 6:30 based on his book, Democracy's Discontent. And then on Thursday, the following day, Richard Sennett, Diane Davis, Claire Zimmerman, Marcus Meeson, and Miguel Robles Duran will reflect on the state of democracy and its relationship to architecture and cities, sort of building off of Michael Sandel's talk, but also the book. That roundtable will be in Stubbins at 12:30 on Thursday. So we have two events with sort of after parties the next day at noon, which I think is actually a really important format for generating ideas and then continuing them as conversations, which I think is something that should be happening anyway in the school. So before I introduce Germane, I'd like to start this evening by talking about where we are and turning to the words of our colleague and friend, Garnett Cardigan, who's an essayist and lecturer in urbanism down the street at MIT. I know few people who craft words as beautifully as he does. When Garnett lectured here at the GSD, he wrote what I would call a short essay about the land, what others would call a land acknowledgement. So to quote Garnett, he said, "To walk, stand, sit, or lie on any land is to be on a landscape layered with histories, memories, possibilities, realized and denied, and stories that demand to be acknowledged and told. Whether you are here in this hall or watching on land elsewhere, you're on land whose histories and stewardship and accompanying injustices need to be acknowledged, and proper recognition is merely a first step." The place of this lecture, the Harvard Graduate School of Design, is located on the traditional and ancestral land of the Massachusetts, who are the original inhabitants and stewards of what's now named Boston and Cambridge. We pay respect to the people past and present and future of the Massachusetts tribe, for whom the land remains sacred, and which we honor, recognizing that this act demands that we ask, what are our obligations to the land and the many people who have been its stewards and its occupants? And we invite you, wherever you view this, to reflect on how foregrounding the stories and perspectives of indigenous inhabitants on the past, present, and future of where you are shifts your understanding of and your obligations to the land and the people around you. So in short, land, all land, has had previous inhabitants, And often they didn't leave their lands voluntarily or easily, something that we're reminded of particularly acutely today, having witnessed this past year what's going on in Israel, Gaza, and now Lebanon. We as researchers, writers, architects, landscape architects, urban planners and designers, we as teachers and as students, we as citizens of the world work always within the very midst of these impossible situations that stem from the very word inhabitation. Echoing Garnett, I invite you, I beseech you, to reflect, always to reflect, before, as, and after you do so. Germane Barnes is the principal of Studio Barnes, an associate professor and director of the Master of Architecture graduate program at the University of Miami School of Architecture. Barnes's practice investigates the connections between architecture and identity, examining architecture's social and political agency through historical research and design speculation, which is a pairing that everyone should be doing. But I'm glad that you actually say that you do it and that you actually do it. I won't recite all of his prizes, exhibitions, and publications. We'd be here forever. I'll just point you to his website and suggest that you all follow him. His winning Wheelwright proposal, Anatomical Transformations in Classical Architecture, maybe not the title that people would expect to hear from Germane Barnes, proposed examining Roman and Italian architecture through the lens of non-white constructors, which I think is a very interesting lens to think about, especially with the exhibit outside in Drucker Gallery, studying how spaces have been transformed through the material contributions of the African Diaspora while creating new architectural possibilities that emerge within investigations of Blackness. The Wheelwright Prize that he received funded 2 years of research and travel, including archival research on the portico and the porch as types across continents and cultures, tracing them throughout Italy and Northern Africa. So tonight's lecture is payback time. It's an opportunity for us to learn from Germane. I'll say that Germane's wearing a perfect sweatshirt for his role in our school. Aimé, he's well loved by this school. So I welcome Germane Barnes to the podium.
Thank you all for being here. First, I'd like to thank Sarah. Sarah, you're really good at the introductions. And she didn't see my shirt until maybe like 15 minutes ago. So that was completely off the cuff. So that's impressive. And also I want to say thank you to the jury because I would not be standing here if it weren't for you. And for many of you who don't know, we had to do this during COVID. So the entire presentation was done on Zoom, one-on-one with Megan. It was only the two of us, and Megan had her screen off the whole time. So you know how if you're on Zoom and nobody has a screen on, you're like, am I talking to a void? Am I talking to myself? What is happening in this moment? And then at the end, the screen came back on, and she had this huge smile on her face. I was like, oh, I didn't put her to sleep. This is incredible. And then I found out I won. So, yes, this is payback because I thought after my 2 years, I was never going to have to do this lecture. And then I got an email from Sarah. And Sarah said, so about that Wheelwright Prize you got in 2021, going to need you to come up here to Boston and talk about what we gave you money to do. So, you all were serenaded by a bunch of Tyler, the Creator songs. And we're going to start this lecture off about a crazy thing called anatomical transformations in classical architecture. Fun fact, that is not how I talk. But I felt in order to win the Wheelwright Prize, I had to put a name that would seem like this is something that Harvard would fund. The actual top part, whether it's flower blooms, that's actually how I talk. So I was like, this is going to be great. But let me put this other title so that they take me serious as a part of this. So I think it's important to start back from the original proposal. The committee knows this, but you all can get a peek behind the curtain. A lot of this started with the fact that in architecture, you don't see a lot of representation of people who look like me. It just is what it is. I went to 4 years of architecture undergrad, 2.5 years of graduate school. I never had a black TA, never had a black professor, never had a black critic, never had a black juror, ever. So when I'm going through my history courses and I'm learning about important buildings, I'm from Chicago, you see these amazing, beautiful towers, but I never saw a tower by a black architect. But we know that slavery existed, and we know that a lot of bodies were transported from the second largest continent. So it was quite remarkable to me that throughout that historical trajectory, I was not learning about the second largest continent in the world. All the work that I was seeing was coming from Far East Asia or Europe or the United States. I wasn't seeing anything from South America, I wasn't seeing anything from Africa. It just completely removed from my entire education. And you know, when you take those foundational architecture courses, you all may not have to do this because you're in graduate school, but if you study architecture as a first-year student, when you're like 18 or 19 years old, they give you these things called survey classes. Now, I'm going to show my age right now. As a part of those survey classes, they just put a bunch of pictures on a screen and say, memorize the location, the architect, and be close to like 100 years of where this thing was actually built. If you stay within 100 years, you pass the exam. You don't, then they're like, all right, you weren't paying attention. And at the end of the semester, you have like this catalog of buildings. And at the end, I'm like, I don't see any building from the continent of Africa. I'm like, but you guys love showing me the Colosseum. But I also know that the Mediterranean is vast, and the proximity to North Africa meant there had to be some sort of cross-pollination between the two. But why is that missing from what I'm learning? So then, at one point in my life, I was known as the porch guy. So I won this award from the Graham Foundation to look at the porch and studied across the diaspora from Africa all the way through to Chicago. When you become known for one thing, it's so hard to break away from being called that one thing. So when the Wheelwright came around, I had a colleague that said to me, well, Germane, you know, Italy had porches far before Africa. And I was like, all right, cool, bro. Like, thanks for telling me that. But then I thought, I was like, wait a minute, that's a great proposal to put together for the Wheelwright. Like, maybe I can go trace this contested history and see which one came first, the portico or the porch. And so I put these two slides up. And in my head, I know Megan was smiling really hard when she saw this, but I couldn't see her face. Remember, we're on Zoom, so I don't know what's going on. But in my head, I was like, she's smiling right now. She's seeing the shotgun home and my current research as the porch guy, and she's seeing the Pantheon, and soon I'm going to be the column guy. And so as a part of that, I just started looking up what it means to understand the African diaspora in Italy. Right? So there's numerous locations of where you have people like Septus, who was the first African ruler of Rome, people from North Africa. And then foolishly, I want to emphasize foolishly, I said to Megan, I'm going to design my own column order. Now, students, it is fantastic to be brazen and to have irrational confidence. But if you win these things, then you have to actually do it. So I proposed this, I put the drawing up, and I was like, we know Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, composite, like, but what would a truly black order be? And you know, we love quoting Vitruvius and how the columns are inspired by the female figure. I was like, all right, what if I make a column inspired by the black figure and then reimagine architecture through that lens? So imagine the Leaning Tower of Pisa with black columns. Not like black in the color, but like black in what that means, right, as the actual architecture. And I'm telling you, they bought it. They went for it. They said, let's give this kid money. It was the greatest day. I got a phone call from Sarah. I missed the first call. Luckily, she called back. I feel like if she didn't call back, I would have lost the prize. Whoever was next in line was like, well, clearly, he doesn't want it. Let's give it to somebody else. But she called. She's like, hi, I'm Dean Sarah Whiting. And in my head, I was like, wait a minute, this what I think it is? And then she says it, and I immediately just start cursing a lot on the phone. I'm not going to do that now, but I started cursing a lot on the phone. Sarah will tell you if I'm lying or not. I cursed a lot in that moment because I was so excited. So then I get on a plane, and I go to Italy. And so I'm there, and I go to the American Academy in Rome's library to look up all these books on architecture. And when I go in there, I can't find anything that talks about the African diaspora and classical architecture within the architecture department, which is insane to say out loud. Instead, I had to go to archaeology and anthropology. And once I got to those different locations, I started to find all of these texts, one of which was the most important for me, and that was North African Stone Speak. And I came across this photograph. This photograph seems ubiquitous. Doesn't seem like there's anything that's interesting about it. But this is literally called Opus Africanum. Now, what makes this an actual African process, besides the fact that it was created in Tunisia, if you notice these vertical bricks that then have the horizontal bricks below them, that is both structural and aesthetic. So this became an engineering feat that North Africans created to go tall with the structures that they were creating. But the underlying part of it that I thought was so clever, notice all of the smaller horizontal bricks in between. Those are symbols of wealth. The smaller the horizontal elements, the more money and labor that you can afford. So when you see structures like this, what you're seeing is how much money a kingdom or a king or a prince would actually have. Now, this is in Tunisia. This is in Pompeii. So again, this idea that there was no influence back or forth was patently false. So when you go to Pompeii, you begin to see the same thing here along this facade. That also is Opus Africanum. So then I continue through the text. And the amazing thing when you're going through these books is you start to learn so much about columns and columnar orders and things of that nature. And I think for me, the most illuminating part is that while Egypt had columns first, emphasis on Egypt had columns first. Greece adopted that and created Ionic, Doric, and Corinthian, which, again, we're in School of Architecture. We should all know this. The ironic part is people who study in Greece start with Africa. They start with Egypt as their foundation. Oddly, we do not. We jump right ahead to Greece, or even further, to Italy. And so within this text, and thank you, Matt, for the thing, like the laser comes in handy. This right here, that was an order called the Aeolic, A-E-O-L-I-C. It came around the exact same time as the Ionic. Ionic ended up winning. It became the column order that we see all the time. But for me, this was the more beautiful of the two. It had a lot in common with the Papyrus order, which is an order that came from Egypt. That's the one you probably see if you go to the Met or something like that. So I'm thinking through, what does that mean? But before I even get to the columns, I'll learn about this, which is Opus Sectile, S-E-C-T-I-L-E. So Opus Sectile looks a lot like mosaics, but there's one small caveat. Mosaics traditionally have units that are the same size. Opus Sectile, which I find so clever and so representative of what it means to be from the continent of Africa or African descent, is that it's whatever pieces they had, they made something beautiful out of that. So that's why you don't see a uniformity in the size of the shapes. You still see a mural, but it's what can we get our hands on? Which in my opinion really tells the story of blackness in the United States of America, which is whatever scraps you give me, I'm gonna make something clever out of that. And so I went to quite a few places in Italy to get documentation of all this. A lot of these images here are from Ostia Antica. And this is literally remains, some of which, because there's so few left, right before the centennial, they've taken all of these actual walls down and put them into museums so that they don't get damaged for the centennial. But again, you're seeing all of these pieces that combined create something else. And then I went to the south of Italy. I spent a lot of time in Sicily, specifically Palermo, because there's a clear connection between Palermo and North Africa. And I'd be remiss if I didn't recall an anecdote from when I was there. So I was in Milan, and as one does when they get a lot of money at one time, you spend sometimes it on foolish things. So I went to this really fancy dinner. I treated myself. Thank you, GSD. And as a part of that, I met these really cool Italian guys. They work for Maserati. And they say, well, man, where are you staying? Like, I'm staying in Rome. They're like, oh, a good guy like you should not be in Rome. You should be in northern Italy. And this is when I'm first learning about, like, the Mason-Dixon line of Italy. And they're like, no, you should be up here. I'm like, what's wrong with Rome? Like, well, you know, the more south you go, the less Italian it is. I was like, well, what do you mean by that? Well, you know, there's a lot of different stuff happening low. He was trying as hard as he could to just like not be racist, but it was like still like Steinly like coming out of his pores, so you could still tell. And so I told him, oh, I'm going to spend a month in Palermo. He's like, no, you will not go to Sicily. That is not Italy at all. And I'm like, I'm still not quite understanding what's happening. But then when I got to Italy, I was like, oh, I get it now. This is way more cool and way more fun than up north. So you guys are just really mad that they have way more culture and flavor than you do. And so you're down there, you start to see people that are from Tunisia, from Morocco, from Egypt. There's so much Moorish architecture that's there. I just absolutely love the place. But this is where I started to find more instances of opus sectile. When you're there, a lot of the monuments, a lot of the memorials, a lot of the cathedrals all have this as a part of it. And so you see these amazingly beautiful images that don't have your typical square mosaic reveal like you find in Rome or in somewhere like Torino or Florence, et cetera, but no less ethnically rich and beautiful. So while I was there, I had inspiration, because there's no way you can go abroad and if you really take it serious, not be influenced by what you see. So this is inside of my studio, and I said to myself, I'm going to do my own version of opus sectile in my studio. I'm going to cut every single piece of these vinyl by hand. Shouldn't be that hard, because I'm assuming all of the tiles on the floor are the exact same size. They were not. And they were not because there's a certain level of craftsmanship that resides within Italy, that you do things with your hands, and there might be a little bit of human error. And so with that process, I was like, all right, I got it. Labor is so important in this country. How things are made is so important in this country. And so I was just trying to find ways to match the color palette, do this just exercise of getting my brain to open up to what does it mean to do things by hand. Because I hadn't done this stuff since I was an undergrad. You know, you all probably do everything on the computer nowadays. Doing things by hand just gave me a different appreciation that I forgot about when I was an undergraduate student a long time ago. So you see now on the wall, those were the templates for how I came up with the other ones, right? And then there's something special about this paper. So this paper is also very boring, generic if you're in Italy. This is the paper when you go to restaurants, it's the scrap paper they put your plates on. It's literally just construction paper. It's recycled pulp. Nobody cares about it. But it had a very beautiful texture to it, so I asked the chef, can I just have a couple boxes of it? And he looked at me like I was crazy. He's like, well, why do you want this paper? I was like, I'm an architect. I need this. So I just asked for the paper. He gave me a couple boxes. And as a part of that, I was like, I'm going to do every single drawing on this paper. So I'm going to cut everything by hand. I'm going to put this through. I'm going to draw by hand on it. A little bit of digital as well, go back and forth between analog and digital. And it became this process. And you all know that you're in architecture school, they probably make you do a lot of maps. So my first thought was, I gotta make a map. This map is called That's Not the Right Size. And that's because when you learn about maps, you learn about the Mercator projection, and you realize that none of the actual size of those countries are the right size. Almost every single one you see is incorrect. Like we see how small the continent of Africa is on one of those maps, but in reality, it should be 3-4 times bigger than things like United States. That should be much smaller. Greenland should be much smaller. So this drawing was my way of trying to collapse the real sizes. Now notice, Africa didn't shrink that much. But a lot of these Western places did. And this was one of those super systemic processes. So one of your former professors was my mentor, Jennifer Bonner. And I'll never forget, she was like, Germane, you gotta have a system. What is your system? What are you gonna do to make sure everything is done in a certain way? So in my head, I was like, all right, what is the system for reorienting this map? Some person who had way too much time on their hands found out the exact size of every single continent and then published it open source. So then I took that data and input the scale factor for every single continent to get everything down to its correct size. So I can see what this stuff actually looked like. And so this is the final version of that drawing, again, on that paper. So again, collapsing these ideas of labor, of spatial representation, of migration as well. And then I wanted to make a timeline. Because again, how do we understand this whole thing in the context of the first time we see Opus Africanum or Opus Sectile all the way through, and what type of things were literally stolen or taken from the continent of Africa all the way to Italy. So things like elephants or olives, things of that nature. If you actually take one step back and look at the drawing, and you put the two halves together, it's actually a transatlantic slave ship. So this is where sort of the starting point of my columnar order actually starts. It's where it begins. And again, keeping with the same theme of the paper as a means of cataloging this body of work, so that if anybody says to me, what did you do with your Wheelwright money? I can just pull out tons of paper like this and say, you go look for it yourself. So we had some visitors to come look by. And in the end, this is where everything got fun and funky. So as I mentioned before, labor became a really big deal while I was there, as well as migration. The last of my triumvirate is identity. So my time in Italy really became my way of understanding what it meant to be American, and then with the difference between being black there in that time. Every time I would go somewhere, if I saw someone that was black, they typically were someone of domestic labor or someone delivering food. Rarely was a person that was just enjoying their day walking past, which I found like completely disheartening. And this issue of labor just kept popping up over and over and over again. And so I was thinking about how people move through places with autonomy versus those that are moved without autonomy. And this is a time where a lot of people were being displaced from the continent of Africa due to various things. Some were war, some were extraction, and the cold reception people were receiving when they came to that country. So I said to myself, there's no way I can talk about my columnar order without talking about these three things. And again, what is your system? So as a part of reading all of those texts, I started to come across the exact same rules all the time. So I compiled this full list of rules and said, I have to break every single one in order to create my order. So you can see things like even number of columns, the proportions, overlapping, intersections, etc. I said, yeah, we're going to discard all of this. So the first column is the identity column, and it's inspired by hair. This was on show at the Venice Biennale. And this is a very didactic drawing because when you do things like the Venice Biennale, you have to have like one architectural drawing, and then the rest you can do whatever you want. And so I wanted to put the identity column inside of the Pantheon because I just thought, one, it was both tongue-in-cheek. But I got these archives from Harvard, so I was like, look at this. It's very serendipitous that you all have all these Piranesi drawings that I can be able to use. And I'll tell you all, you can tell I kind of have a sense of humor. Have you ever seen this amazing movie with Shia LaBeouf and Megan Fox called Transformers? Like one of the greatest movies of our lifetime. Well, within that movie, there's a scene where they go inside of the Hoover Dam. And the Hoover Dam only exists because they needed to protect the world from knowing that Megatron existed. But the cell phones that you use, the iPads that this gentleman's using right here, everything like that, that came because they reverse engineered Megatron. So I said to myself, what if I switched the Piranesi drawing and made the identity column Megatron? So all of the columns that we see today are based off of these three columns that came far before those. So these are really my way of sort of creating an alternative reality of these columns came first because the African diaspora was there first, and identity, migration, and labor are more important figures. And then all of these little people at the bottom, all of these theorists and stuff are now taking this to become Ionic, Doric, and Corinthian. And they just built everything around it to hide and conceal this true history, while they're worshiping it on the inside of the actual structure. And that text in the background says identity in Berber. So that was the other part of the research, was learning through how the Berber clan was seen from Western eyes. And it was not in a positive light. It was always negative, whether that be because they were people who spoke differently or looked differently or ate different food or migrated differently. These were things that were not seen as Western. So I felt I had to pay homage to that as a part of the research. And then, as I mentioned, how do I now reimagine drawings going forward? So this is Howard University's campus. This is a historic educational building, but this is a building that was built by Black people. So I felt, why not put the identity columns on the front of Howard University as opposed to the Corinthian columns that were there before? And at the bottom, there are the rules, again, in Latin, Berber, and English. And so I take you behind the scenes to how we actually made the identity column. Because when you go to Venice, you got to go big or you go home. So it started as a massive 10-foot long, 5 feet in both directions, Spanish Marquina marble. They did take out a massive hollow core from the inside because the Venice team, led by the amazing Leslie Loco, said, Germane, we're not going to pour a brand new slab just for you, so make that thing weigh a lot less. So just taking out this core reduced the actual monument by 3 tons. It still came in at 2 tons, but instead of being 5, it was only 2. And then they sent me this picture in Wisconsin. It was cut and fabricated by Cora Stone, who's done a lot of work for people that actually work here. Fun fact about Cora Stone, they didn't answer any of my emails, any of my Instagram DMs or anything. They just left them all on red. But I had to call a friend who knows way more people than me, and then they answered. They're like, oh, we're so sorry. We didn't notice that we didn't see your message. Meanwhile, I took a screenshot, and I was like, look, you read it. It was on Instagram. I have read receipts. You saw it, you just didn't answer. But it worked out. So they sent me this. They have a lot of high-tech equipment. It's really amazing things they do there. And you can see the columns starting to take shape. And so each of these striations go back to this idea of hair and identity, and it kind of feels like a body pushing out of an actual object. And the other thing I wanted to do was render it to look more like bark, so you can actually touch it, only to find out that museums don't like when you tell people to touch the work. So I got a few slaps on the wrist from Leslie saying, stop telling people to touch the column, because then they think they can touch everybody else's stuff as well. So I would just stand by the column and say, yeah, you can touch it. And so that's where they placed it. So they sent me a picture of this, and I thought it was a rendering. If I'm being honest with you, I was like, that's not real. Why y'all spend all that time making a rendering? You already have the column. Doesn't make any sense to me. But it was real. And so they positioned it within the larger columns of the Arsenale, and it is the first piece inside of the entire show. So it was both scary but also exciting because you set the tone for the rest of the building. And they had this amazing lighting designer, this older fellow who would just ride a bicycle along the Arsenale, stop, point at people in the sky. They do things with the lights, and he just rolled back off again as if nothing happened. But all the lighting was incredible, so like I get why he was that revered. And so this is the detailing that I mentioned about the striations and the hair, plait, dreadlocks, braids, the texture. And I was very fortunate to present all of this, again, within the court of the Arsenale. So they gave me money. I actually did something with it. And those were the drawings. And we also made some masks, but I'll save that for later. So now, you've seen the identity column, but there's also migration and labor. This is the migration column. This is the labor column. The migration column is literally inspired by bodies moving across water. And so I wanted to pull this image of the historic slave trade, and you see all these bodies compacted together, understanding that water is a space of blackness. Unfortunately, many people did not make that transition across the continent to the Americas. They are littered to the bottom of the ocean, but that is a spatial place for people that look like me. So as a part of that, we took water as the inspiration for the design of the column and tried to manipulate a ripple in a way that would create the actual column itself. And so to fabricate this, I wanted to use poplar wood. If you've ever heard the Nina Simone song, Strange Fruit hanging from the poplar trees, Poplar, that strange fruit was black bodies during early areas of the United States, before emancipation and after, when black bodies were lynched repeatedly. And so it was fabricated in Chicago by this amazing place called Novelist Wood. And so they'd always send me images of things as it was going on. So this is them prepping all of the pieces, sanding down all of the poplar wood that is going to be milled. To give it the shape that eventually becomes the migration column. So as these pieces began to get compiled, you begin to see the water ripple as a part of the wood. A lot of those slave ships were also made of wood, and now you're seeing it come together. And it's becoming to form into the actual migration column. Then in addition, the labor column, which is really inspired by my time there, but also understanding what does it mean to reveal who made the spaces that we sit within, where do the materials come from. So how can I talk about labor without talking about plantations? Recently, I've been doing this thing. Okay, so I've been seeing a therapist lately, and I've been seeing a therapist lately because you gotta protect your mentals. You just have to, right? And my therapist gave me a prompt. My therapist said, go ask your parents questions. I'm very blessed to have both of my parents still be alive. So I called my mom and my dad, and I just asked them questions for like an hour and a half. I learned so much that I never knew. If you still have a guardian around, I implore you to do the same thing. As a part of the conversation with my father, I found out that his parents, my grandparents, were sharecroppers. Had no idea. If you don't know what a sharecropper is, that's basically still a slave, but they pay you a wage that makes it not slavery. So his family is from Mississippi in the South, and the entire time they're tilling to soil, they're helping build an economy that they're barely getting any money for. So how can you talk about labor without talking about both unpaid and paid labor? So because of that soil, decided to make a fraction of the identity column out of clay. So you're seeing the face, you're seeing the shapes, how all of this is being sculpted. We are very familiar with red brick and red clay and how that's used across the United States of America. And so you're seeing it being fabricated. And I think the most amazing part about it was we actually got union labor to actually install it. So this is the team. This is in the Art Institute of Chicago, and they're actually installing the labor column, which I thought was so beautiful and serendipitous. And then they were so proud of it being there. And so when you go to the museum, on the label identification, it has all of their names, because you have to reveal who these people are. You have to reveal what was actually done. And so the museum was like, are you sure you want to put everyone's name? I'm like, yeah, I didn't make this damn thing, so why not tell people who actually did? Like, yeah, I designed it, but I didn't build this. But that, I think, goes back to this understanding of how we look at the built environment. And so this is the final version of it there in the space. And like I said to you all before, the identity column was inspired by hair, right? So you've seen the marble version of the identity column. Now I'm going to show you the actual hair version of the identity column. So once upon a time, when I had more hair, I too used to have braids. And then my mother said to me, can you please cut your hair? I'll let you get your ears pierced if you go to the barbershop. Felt like a fair trade to me, so I immediately went to the barbershop, shaved it all off. Let's go to Claire's. Let's go get this done. And yes, I did get them pierced at Claire's. So this is the amazing Shaniqua. Shaniqua is an artist in New York from South Florida that studied under Nick Cave because I don't know how to do hair. But I showed her the identity column. And I said, I want to make this out of hair. Can you help me do that? And so she started on a loom, and she's like, I think we can actually do this. So she was an amazing collaborator through this entire process. And over the span of 12 weeks, she would show me how she's building this object on the loom. My mom went by, my niece went by to go see everything because she's based in Chicago. And so you're seeing the identity column actually come to life. So you're seeing the same striations, you're seeing the same rhythm, you're seeing the same patterns, but you're seeing the original idea, not the actual marble. And she would send me these really cool videos of her braiding the hair. And so I said to her, can we put every single black hairstyle that we know in there? I affectionately always tell people I am the youngest of 6, and I have 4 older sisters. So I've seen their hair get done a lot when I was a kid. So all of the hairstyles that I witnessed are a part of this actual column. And so you see it there. And all of these objects are the adornments and sort of accoutrement of the hair, right? It's the beads, it's the barrettes, it's all the things that go inside of it. And so this is the entire column laid out before it gets turned into its final version. And so as you can see on the left, it's a massive 9-foot tall, 4.5 foot in diameter of all synthetic hair. So again, this is 12 weeks of work. Shaniqua was amazing, and she really did bring the project to life. And so that's it actually installed. And this is the details. So you can see things like the single braid. You see the barrettes that are all there within the structure. It was quite an amazing opportunity. Now, the cool thing about these types of projects, this is at the Art Institute of Chicago, they were like, Germane, we're going to give you the architecture gallery, and we're going to assign you an exhibition designer. I laughed, because if you're an architect, you're going to be your own exhibition designer. So I said, I want to do everything. Let us do the exhibition design as well. Irene Sunwoo is the director of architecture and design at Art Institute of Chicago. And she's like, sure, you want to do it, go for it. So she would send me pictures. And she sent me this picture of the Danteum with all of these columns. I was like, oh man, that is a beautiful picture. I can imagine a field of columns inside of the gallery. And then she sent me this picture of the Losers Her video with Missy Elliott and Sierra. And she was like, look at all the columns in the background. And I was like, okay, now you're talking my language. Now you're into what I'm into. But because it's in Chicago, and that's where I'm from, I had to put a Chicago twist on it. So this is at the Central Park Conservatory. Many people go to Chicago and they go to conservatory. It's one of the best in the entire globe. I know this only as the Golden Dome, because where I'm from, this is where we play basketball during the summer. That's what I know it as. But other people see it as this architectural marvel that has neoclassical adornments. And so I thought to myself, well, what if I take the Golden Dome and place it inside of the Art Institute, specifically inside of the Architecture Gallery? But then what if I put a little bit of twist of hip hop in there too? So I started looking at album covers. So we have Magna Carta Holy Grail, which is not a good album, but the album cover is nice. If you think that's a good album, you're lying to yourself. It's not a good album. It's not a good album. I see your face. You know it's true. It's not a good album. There's like 1 or 2 good songs on it. That's it. You look shocked. It's the truth. There's the Black Panther album. Objectively, a good album. Lil J. Cole. And then the Pantheon again. So imagine working with the graphic design team at the Art Institute and sending them a bunch of hip-hop albums. And people are like, who are these people? What are these albums? What does this mean for graphic representation? Like, just trust me here. I'm cooking. Let me do my thing. So as a part of this, the idea became using the actual floor plan of the Pantheon mixed with these other elements to create this room of just sort of floating columns. So you're seeing a Rhino screenshot of all of the columns and fragments before it became the final idea. And I also had this brilliant idea to turn the columns themselves into apparatuses to hold the drawings, upon which a lot of the exhibition team was like, I don't know if we can do this. This seems really expensive. To which I then said, well, it just so happens, I got a little bit of money from Harvard. So whatever budget you have, I can add a little bit of money to it. You know, museums have their budgets. They didn't know I had a surplus. So as a part of it, I was like, we're doing the whole thing. So it really became this idea of a field of columns inside the room, whether those be the physical columns, my identity, migration, or labor, or these floating fragments. And this is the outside of the gallery when you walk through. I convinced them to let me do a stripe across the outside of the room. The funny part is the museum director came by to me and was like, I'm so glad you forced them to do this. I didn't want you to do it in the beginning, but now that it's there, I'm very happy. Because for me, it's a way of, one, identifying what's going on in the space, but also talking about the fact that in many white institutions, you have to reduce your blackness. So if you're inside of that space, you get to be unbridled exactly who you are. When you're in these public spheres, how much of yourself gets reduced to where you're down to just a single strip of your identity? So this ended up being the final exhibition design. So you see all the pieces that then became the actual Columnar Disorder show. And so these are some of the original drawings from Venice, but also some new ones. You see the full identity column, the full migration column here. You see all three in the space, as well as the actual images again from the Rhino model. And you get to see how all of these drawings get framed together. So this is the trio of migration, drawing, the inspiration of wood, and then the final version of it into limestone. You see labor and labor, identity in the foreground, and now you're seeing them all together. And the framing of these spaces was always intentional as a way for you to see the drawings behind them. So everything became a column. The other thing that the artist who was very upset with me about is I put them at a height that people will want to rest and sit on them, because in my mind, every single person would become the column by interacting with the physical space. I was really seduced by this picture that Solange made when she got married and everybody was in all white, and it was like everybody was standing like columns. I was like, oh, I'm gonna recreate that inside of the thing. And then they told me, stop telling people they can rest on the work, stop telling people they can, just Germane, stop doing that. But it's like the perfect height for a person to rest. So they started putting alarms on everything, so now you actually can't do it anymore. So I apologize. I think it's just really great to see the views of all these things, to see how everything just lines up perfectly in the way that we set up the entire show. And none of this would have been possible without the Wheelwright Prize, right? And the amazing part about this is, as a Chicagoan, I spent many school years visiting the Art Institute. It's one of the most repetitive field trips you take when you go to a Chicago public school. And I went to public school from kindergarten through 12th grade, so just manage the amount of times I went to the Art Institute. And to be able to say that I have worked there was incredible. And so I had a little bit of money left over, so we threw a party. My family's there. Now, the best part about this, there are museum directors in here dancing. There are people that are in charge of multi-million-dollar companies like the Mellon Foundation, and they're dancing at an after party about columns. Right? Just think about that. And they're literally doing the electric slide inside of Chicago Mobile Makers, who Meyer Bird Murphy was actually a finalist for the Wheelwright a couple of years ago. So in my mind, I was like, all right, they'll be okay if I spend money on this because it's another person that they put as a finalist. Seems like that would make sense. So I thought it was just quite a beautiful way to sum up the entire weekend of us being there. Tony, we missed you. You know, you and I were dance partners. If you were there, it would have happened again. So I'll leave you with these two slides. Did you hear about the rose that grew from a crack in the concrete? Our prophet, Tupac Shakur, who rivals Vitruvius. You wouldn't ask why the rose that grew from the concrete had damaged petals. On the contrary, we would all celebrate its tenacity. We would all love its will to reach the sun. Well, we are the rose. This is the concrete. These are my damaged petals. Don't ask me why, ask me how. Thank you. Okay, I was told I'm supposed to do Q&A. Apparently people have microphones. They're gonna walk around if you have a question. If you wanna know my zodiac sign, don't ask me. And we can go from there. Okay.
Thank you for bringing you here. There's a lot of you that we just heard, which is great. It was beautiful. My question for you is on individuality and reproducibility with your columns. Mm-hmm. So the orders, the Greek orders as we know them, are deliberately easily reproducible. And so to what extent was that something that you thought about with your column?
So part of it was that they actually would not be repeatable and they would not be replicable in that type of way. There was a certain intentionality that I put into the design of all of them. They started from a bunch of sketches in my sketchbook before they became the final version. And I think putting that amount of care into the process meant that whenever they appear, it had to be for a real reason. It couldn't just be as a final aesthetic lipstick at the end. And I find a lot of times when we're always reproducing other work, it's less about that intentionality, more just what gives it legitimacy, or what allows someone to think that now this is correct because it has a certain formula that we've decided is the correct formula for architecture. So I think by creating such unique and oddly shaped forms, they only can appear when absolutely necessary, and they only can appear in the right context. And that was the hope, and fortunately I've been able to execute that at multiple modes.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
I really enjoyed the presentation. I've been looking forward to this since the semester started when I saw it on the schedule, so I really appreciate your presentation today. And so my name is Montreal. I'm from Kentucky. I'm from the South. And a question I had for you regarding all of your research is the culture is always changing. And so your columns are kind of it's a further exploration of the classical. So with the culture always changing, what does a new column or something that represents us now going forward, what does that look like, or what is the essence of that for you?
I have to make sure I understand that correctly. You're saying how might the columns that were created move the culture forward?
I guess in adding on to them, okay, or something that's based upon kind of where we are now and then where we're going, because the culture is changing, the culture is a trendsetter. So what does that look like, or if that was in addition to the work already created? Gotcha.
So my idea was never to be a shift in culture. Remember, this started as me having a conversation with a colleague who tried to put me in my place, purely because I said that Africa had columns for a very long time, right? So even in that, it wasn't this idea of how can I be disruptive. It became that once I did my travels and moved around and saw things. And I think in that, I would hope that young people like yourself find whatever bravery or courage that you need to then give you a nice little pat on the back that the things you're doing is okay, and the way that you're doing it is okay, and the fact that it may not be mainstream is okay. I always think back to when I had to go find those books, and I went through the architecture department within the library every single day, and I could not find anything. And it wasn't until I went to anthropology and archaeology that I began to find these texts. And to me, that's the beautiful thing about the way you all study here is that you can go to African American studies. You can go to these other departments that then support the things you're getting here. So as far as the culture shifting, you are the culture shift. And that only happens when you get out of a comfort zone of reproduction. So going back to the earlier question, and are you willing to do that? If you are willing to do that, then you have to understand there's going to be pushback, or people that tell you this isn't architecture, or people who tell you that's not the way we typically do things. But that's what we always hear before a shift happens, right? And so if you go back to those earlier images I showed, so much of what it means to look like you and to be from Kentucky, of all places, is to take whatever is there, flip it, manipulate it, and then to make it into something beautiful. So why not continue to do that? And if it succeeds, awesome. If it doesn't, it's still a success because you put yourself out there.
Thank you so much, Germane, with a wonderfully energetic presentation. My question is about your interpretation of fabrication as an extension of labor. I think on the one that you talked about with clay, you could see that real deliberate connection to labor. But with sort of the other materials and mediums and how machines are used as maybe representations of labor, what's sort of your stance on that or exploration with that?
So part of the marble ones that I didn't show, otherwise we'd still be going through the presentation, is that all of those vertical striations you saw on the column, those were done by hand. That wasn't actually done by the larger machine. Cora Stone had two guys, a guy named Taeyong Kim, who actually went to MIT and took classes over at the GSD, and then a guy named Eric. And Eric did everything by hand. Eric does not go to graduate school. He just loves making things with his hands. And he had this really small saw blade, and he had some AR goggles. And he had the full Rhino model on the AR goggles, and he was just doing it like tracing it with the actual blade in his hand in real time. It was incredible to see. Again, I didn't want to put too many slides so the guys would have got bored. But I think all of that labor is important to reveal, because too often people just see the end product and think, oh, this is amazing, especially in architecture. It's like we draw a napkin sketch, it becomes a building. This person's amazing, black cape, et cetera. But there's so many people that made that possible, whether it be the engineers, the subcontractors, the people that put the final detail on the window or the floorboards. So I've always wanted to reveal the entire process so that people understand I am not a single author. None of this stuff is just me. I might have some pretty cool ideas, but it doesn't get executed unless somebody else makes that happen. And I don't know how to carve marble. I don't know how to script. So they did that. And so I felt it's important, again, as an extension of labor, to reveal those things so that people understand it. So whether it's done by hand or done by a digital means, to me, there's no difference. You should always reveal who are the people that do the making, because they also have agency in this process as well.
Hi, thanks for the conversation. Really, really interesting. I guess my question is a little bit about the production of this idea of history and research as sort of the process of doing this. You talked a little bit about the images that you found, where you found them, and then the images you took yourself. I was wondering if how much the actual person or persons that were making those images that you were researching and looking into, how much you looked into them. Used a lot of the historical sketches. You talked a lot about Piranesi's drawings. I was wondering about for instance, the drawings of the slave boats. Who's creating those? Those are very classic images that we sort of are very typical, and when we see those and we think, oh yes, I know exactly what that is, but I don't know who created that. And I was wondering how much of that plays into what you're doing. As well as, when you moved from, Chicago out to Italy and then back, you no longer have that sort of first-person experience of being able to take a photo anymore. How did that sort of work through your process?
So the historical process was an interesting one. The funniest thing about researching through physical books and not just Googling things, or using ChatGPT, these are the kind of things that happen nowadays, when you go to an actual physical library, is that you realize, I'm old, man. I know, I'm just saying, you're part of this process. The funny thing you see is that almost every single book just references another book. every time. It's like text number 1 references text number 2, which references 3, 4, 5, and trying to get to the very first one that started the other text is always the difficult part. So at my sourcing, so many books are just regurgitating the exact same information, just writing it in different ways. I guess people have to get tenure, so they write books in different types of ways. This is kind of how that works. But as a part of it is like, where can I get to the original thought in this, or the original angle of this? And that's why that North African Stone Speak book was so important, because it was one of the ones that didn't have a lot of sources. The people that wrote that book, those were first-hand photographs in North Africa of people going to the archaeological sites and finding that information. As opposed to a lot of the classical texts talking about the origin of the orders, which almost everybody sourced the same Vitruvius text. I'm like, how many times can I read this at a certain point? So those drawings became my way of understanding, how do I now try to position myself within this larger history of columns and columnar orders? Because this is not original in the sense I am not the first person to make my own order. We've seen the corn order, we've seen the chunky order, we've seen all these things from amazing architects. But I wanted to see what made mine different. And I think that process of cutting the paper by hand, drawing the stuff by hand, took me back to this original process that happened years ago before we had all these digital technologies. So historically, I think the North African Stone Speak text, some of the historical imagery that I found was from the US History website. And even with those, it'll tell you what department is in. It won't tell you who drew the thing. And as I said before, I wasn't gonna talk about the columns, to the mask until the end. There's a drawing that many people have always seen. It's an African on a slave auction box, and he has a mask over his face as he's about to be sold. It's an ubiquitous photo. We see it all the time. That actually was the inspiration behind all of the masks, because it became this way of sort of hiding. This is the same time as COVID, which communities were hit the hardest by the COVID pandemic, Black and brown communities. So all these things became together. So I think there's no way I can say my project is not historical, because it references so many other historical processes and means. I just tried to find a different twist to push it in a different direction, and hopefully that's what I succeeded in doing.
Hi, Germane. My name is Malik Williams. I'd like to start by saying thank you for giving us such a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Your work is very, very beautiful. And I was just like a rolling clock, just image after image. So when I was, as you were presenting, I was thinking of this question that I had been dabbling in my mind for years, and it's this idea of what does Black architecture look like. So here in America, we know what, as a result of colonialization, we know what architecture is from the like a white supremacist perspective. We know what architecture looks like from Greece. We know what architecture looks like that has been Japanese influenced, but nobody knows truly what Black architecture is. And I think there's a difference between, and if I offend anyone, I apologize, but I don't mean to. But there's a difference between African American architecture and African architecture, and we're both rooted from the same. We have the same cultural roots, but because of slavery, because we were brought over on boats, that sort of connection there was separated. I have this book. It's called Ghost of Segregation: Racism Hidden in Plain Sight, by Richard Frischman. And I apologize. My question is going to be long, but in this book they document like many different types of buildings here in America that still have like the remnants of slavery, whether it was like slave pens or an entrance that was it was a separate entrance, or was or like the removal of Black Wall Street. example after example, I started to believe that that was what Black architecture looks like, and that was what captivated that history through our architecture. But here's my question. Looking at your work, seeing how deeply woven, no pun intended, it is with like Black status, what it means to, like for instance, hair. That's a symbol of, for us, it's a symbol of status. It's like the presence of, it's a symbol of experiences. I'm curious as to know what inspired your lens to look at the order, the orders of columns through that lens. Was it like this idea of like Black liberation, or like this idea of like us finding ourselves again through like the history that we've known of culturally, like innately almost.
That's beautiful, but I don't give myself that much credit. So a few things. I think one, there's the title, right? The Anatomical Transformations of Classical Architecture, which talks about North Africa and its influence. Understand that some of that may not equal Black. Some of that may equal Arab or something else, right? So I think that's the first important distinction to understand. I, as a full-blooded American, someone that's parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, all the way through, were a part of the transatlantic slave trade, I make sure to distinguish the fact that the work that I do is from a great migration of the U.S. perspective, which is why those three orders reference that type of stuff. Because I don't claim to understand the larger sort of expansiveness of what it means to be a Black architect, right? I think nowadays in 2024, it's incredible that we have far more representation than we had when I was a student back in 2004. Right? I look here in this front seat, I would have never imagined I'd see a Tony Griffin or Tosin, I see you with your head down, but right there, David Brown, like these type of people, I would have never thought this was possible as a student. So I think that we've progressed quite a bit in the ways of understanding what African diasporic, what type of architecture is, which doesn't reduce it to what are the remnants or what is single family, multifamily, segregated housing, et cetera, which is like the most productive version, right? That's where Black people live. It's not Black architecture, if that makes sense. And then when it comes to the way that the work came, I always have this rule that if my family doesn't understand what I'm making, I'm doing a bad job of designing, because they don't have architecture degrees. And if I'm not making the work for them, who the hell am I making it for? So the reason you see the hair is because my sisters see themselves in that column. They point to me and they say, remember when Mom did this? I'm like, yeah, like that's why that's there. When they see the migration column, they see the wood and they understand, they know the Nina Simone, right? When they see labor, they know what it means to work 2 times as hard for half the credit. So these are all things that are absolutely embedded within the culture, but they're things that I don't have to speak to. And so when I try to do architecture, try to do work in that way, I try to represent my family. And if other people see it, then awesome for them. But for me, it always starts with the people who supported me, the people who raised me, because if architecture ended tomorrow, they would still love me. So that's what I always look towards. You got some hands up there.
Hi, thank you so much for this presentation. It was stunning. I am a high school teacher, and so I was kind of viewing this entire presentation and thinking how I could present it to my students in a way that they would understand and appreciate. And so kind of stemming from what you were just explaining, like the Tony Griffins, David Browns of the world, right? Like who are some of the Black and brown architects that inspire you, and how has that developed? You've mentioned this a lot through your presentation. How has that developed and changed? Just some, names that I can bring to my students as they explore and engage with this work.
So the funny thing is, when I was a student, I didn't have any because I didn't know of any. So when I went through undergrad, I was like, point me a black architect, and nobody ever did it. Once I got to grad school, that I saw Paul Revere Williams, who was no longer with us, but pioneered in architecture. But then by that point, this is when a lot of other people like Kunle were coming online. I knew who David was just based off me being from Chicago. I knew who Tony was at that point. But it wasn't like I didn't have the opportunity to have people to look up to as a part of that. Instead, like most people I looked up to were basketball players and rappers. It was like, man, Kanye not crazy yet. This is incredible. But he became crazy. So, there's that part. Lupe's incredible. Then he became a ninja. And there's that part. So that's really how I went through architecture. But now I remain inspired by people I'm lucky enough to call my friends, right? So the Sumaya Valleys of the world, the Olalekan J. Foose of the world, the Sean Cantys of the world, the Jennifer Newsoms of the world, the Taya Wins. All these people I can actually pick up my phone and FaceTime, and they'll actually answer their phone. It's like, what a time to be alive, right? It's like, I have to be 38 for it to happen, but better than never. There's people that teach here like Brian Lee from Colocate that are incredible black architects. We're at a point now where you see so much more representation that is far more common than what it was 20 years ago, when there really was an absolute dearth of representation in a lot of these places. I think now it's actually pretty easy to find quite a few people that are doing amazing stuff. Curry Hackett just graduated from here, and now he's about to do a show at the Cooper Hewitt, which is an amazing institution. I think these people are incredible, and they're everywhere.
There's also a resource in our library called the African American Architect Nexus that your students can go online and research. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
That's like one of the most beautiful lectures I've ever been to. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So I don't know how to frame the question, but I'm also from Chicago.
Hey, what side of town?
It's a suburb of Chicago, Fox Lake.
We'll
It's
let you
northwest.
slide. We'll let you slide. We're in Boston. I always got me, you, Sarah, David. We got to stick together. There's not a lot of us.
I think in the last three questions, something that resonates, and I don't know how to ask it, but one of the hardest things for me getting to architecture school was I started late. And I felt like there was always like this thing of me having to prove, like finding sources to things that were anecdotal for me, like life experiences. And so like I always wondered about things like Stonehenge or like the pyramids that took forever to build. In your experience when you went to Italy, was the purpose with which you started the same with which you ended? And did you ever have that experience where it happened to me a lot where I would have to, I knew what I wanted to say, but then kind of like you said earlier, you had to like legitimize it. And I found that when I was in architecture school, I had to work backwards a lot. But now, and I would have this thing in my mind, like, when do I get to become a source, right? Like, why something that I experienced myself, do I have to get that person that has a degree to say it, even though they've only studied it? So can you speak to, because I feel like you probably went through the same thing, but now you are the source.
That's a lot of pressure. I'll say this. I 100% empathize with you in a sense of having to legitimize the things that are inherent. One of your professors here, I don't think he's teaching this semester, maybe teaching next semester, that's the Brian Lee gentleman I mentioned before. He and I are really good friends. And he knows I like to work in isolation. Like I like to just be on my own and do my own thing. And he always reminds me, cool, a one-person office or one-person project is interesting, but multiple people is a movement. And so if you want to be the source, or if you want to have things sourced, not legitimize it, you just find the other like-minded people who share those same anecdotes. Because I can guarantee you're not going to be the only person that has a lot of those same experiences. And then when you find that community and you find those people, then you begin to cite each other. And you're saying, oh no, this is written by Tony Griffin, or this is written by Sarah Whiting, because you have that community. And then you legitimize yourself. And then other people don't want to miss the wave, and then they'll start citing it as well because they don't want to be left out. So when I was in Italy, again, it started as me tongue-in-cheek positioning the porch versus the portico. In the end, it became labor, migration, and identity. That was not the original idea. So being able to pivot is another thing that's important within this. So while there is a context to systemic processes and how we do things and taxonomies, you still have to be willing to scrap that at a certain point and go a different way and understand something else may happen. And that might not be working forward, backward to forward, forward to backward. We love a post-rationalist. But I think for me, the most important thing is, what am I trying to execute? And what is the story I'm trying to tell? And so everything always starts with narrative. So if I have a story to tell, I can figure out how to get there by some means or method. But I think that's how it happens. So if you have a community, or if you're building that community, how can you cite each other? How can you use each other as a way of saying, when you write your next paper, talk about this work as a part of that, and do that reciprocally. And when you do that, you then build up the network and you build up the text and the books. There's an amazing guy named Iker Gill based in Chicago. He runs a foundation called MAS Context, M-A-S Context. And I just wrote him, I was like, hey, can you let me write a book? I didn't know the man, I just sent him an email, cold email. He's like, about what? And I said, vigilantism. He's like, what the hell does that mean? He's like, well, this is right after George Floyd. Everybody's running around deputizing themselves as stewards of the built environment. Every time people go outside, if somebody's barbecuing, they're telling them you can't barbecue in the park. If you go home, where's your key fob? It's like everybody became Batman. It's like, my God, please take off your cape. And so I asked Iker, I was like, Iker, can I write this book? And he said, sure, that seems interesting. And I literally just called 15 of my friends and said, hey, all y'all want to write an article for this book? They gave me power. And then we had a book. And so now that book can be cited. And now it becomes the thing that allows other people to say this is now legitimate. So I think that's the way that we did it, but that's a way that you can pull it off.
Thank you.
Yep. You got a hand in the front, you got a hand in the back.
I'm back.
What's going on?
No, you raised a really good point earlier. I just wanted to ask a follow-up question, maybe a brief question. Regarding if you had the opportunity for these orders to exist in an architecture somewhere, and kind of this notion of temporality and permanence, would you let your columns exist in a standing permanent architecture? And do you think they should or they shouldn't? And depending on that, do you think that takes away from what they represent and their power?
I would not want them to be permanent. I think they're artifacts. I treat them as artifacts. I look at them as a representation of me during that period, understanding identity, labor, and migration through that lens. I would hope that I would continue to develop as a person to where my views on identity, my views on migration, and my views on labor also begin to shift, so that way the columns are always being updated. That's a lot more work, but if I remain in this same static position from 2021 to 2024, then that's a problem for me going forward, and my therapist taught me that.
Hi,
Hey.
My name is Safwan. I'm Tunisian, actually.
Hey.
And I did my PhD in Italy. I lived in Rome for 9 years. So a lot of what you showed, it was captivating. And a lot of what you showed was familiar. And I like the way you weave, you make the connections between, so the narrative. And actually also my flatmates were Sicilian, so I learned Sicilian. And I actually learned Sicilian when I started thinking in Tunisian, not in Italian.
Yeah.
So I understand you completely. And now the thing is, I do research on design for social innovation. Mm-hmm. And my question was, is there a social design for social innovation from the Global South that is not in the humanitarian perspective? Something like from a decolonial perspective, not social designers going in Africa to help, the idea of helper and help, and this idea of falling into the dark side of the social, creating more problems than solutions. And so I started questioning the Eurocentrism of design, even design for social innovation, even when it's with, let's say, good intentions, ecologically, socially, politically, but in many situations, you're dealing with the social without politicizing the situation. So, like you're helping the poor without questioning poverty. I like the perspective of your work, and what this experience taught you or tells you on how to transform the practice of design, like on the prefigurative role of design, the political role of design. For example, thinking of climate change impacting the global south before the global north, or this environmentalism of the poor. So social and ecological movements in the global south are connected completely when you fight for your livelihood. So what this experience and your work tells about this political transformation that we need in design?
So for me, it's always been very simple in that people understand space. People have an innate ability to construct, right? Without the title of architect, master builder, et cetera, we always have since the beginning of man. We just don't look at people the same if they don't have a certain title or certain credential. So my idea has always been architects are supposed to be the reconfigured or the translator of other people's spatial narratives. So if you go to these places like South Africa, or you go to these places like Argentina, et cetera, people who we look at as the indigenous, or we look at as the people that are from there that don't have the same agency, they know how to build without us. They've been doing it forever without us. They just might not have the legal paperwork to be able to do that. So if you do have that paperwork, why not just be a steward and allow them to then translate that through you? So when I do my community work, when I go and meet with people, I talk like a regular person. I don't use architectural jargon because I talk like a regular person. They then communicate back and say, no, we know what we want, we know what we need. Now what that really means is, are you able to remove your ego? Because in that moment, you might not get something that's beautiful at the end in the way that you might see beauty. But they do, because for them it's useful, or for them it is beautiful. And are you willing to put that to the side? A lot of architects and designers aren't, because we're taught everything's supposed to be aesthetically pleasing. Exactly, it's supposed to be aesthetically pleasing. But if the goal is to make something that people resonate with, then you still get that final beauty in the end anyway. So I used to jokingly always tell people, I'm not going to win any awards. None of the work we do will end up in D-Zine or Design Boom, all this kind of stuff, because it's the stuff that people need. Through some strike of God, it still made its way into the other location. But I always thought that was going to be the case, because it wasn't the super expensive avant-garde facade system. And people would tell me these amazing, I'm like, I don't know who these architects are. Who are you talking about? Or do you know this building? I don't know those buildings. I did not do well in those survey classes. The ones I showed you, it was like, I would just blank out. This is so boring. So I didn't know the context. But I did know how to speak to people. I did know how to communicate. And I did know that just because a person doesn't know how to use the same dimensions as me, if they've worked in the kitchen and they use pots, pans, tables, forks, and knives as units of measurements, I can still translate that into architecture. So the fact that you said all about your upbringing, you've probably seen it at a one-to-one scale, that people know how to make stuff. They just might be a person who's moving across continents and doesn't get the same job, or came and they were an engineer in their country, but in this country, they're a busboy because the degree didn't translate. And it's like, no, they have the knowledge, it's there. So how about I maybe remove the hierarchy and allow us to work on the same plane, and then now we can actually go make some magic. I think we got time for one more question, and then we got to roll right there. Make it a good one, no pressure.
Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Shaluva, and so my question is, in contending with topics like migration, identity, and labor, one thing that is at the center of these topics for Black people is trauma. So I'm assuming in developing your research, you had to situate yourself very much in the center of Black trauma. So what was that experience like for you as a Black person? How did you overcome it, if you ever did? And did that change the way you interacted with the research and information?
So, fun fact, I did not do it from a place of trauma. Yeah, mainly because I can't do work that way. I don't know how other people do, I can't. When I do work, it's from a place of joy. So the hair column you saw, that was me celebrating my siblings. The migration column that you saw was me celebrating all the people who did make the journey. The labor column was me celebrating my family and how they made it to Chicago and how I exist today. So positioning myself was actually pretty easy because it was like, all right, how can I tell this story in a beautiful way that enhances what we already know and can make all of them proud of how they got here? And that's why I wanted to end with that quote so you can understand, like, this isn't about trauma. This is about perseverance. It's about resilience. It's about making something out of nothing. And sure, you might have scars and scratches and your shirt might be a little bit tattered, or you might speak a little differently, or you might say ax instead of ask. But in the end, it's still a rose. So I hope that you do the same thing and you're able to work from a position of joy, because I guarantee you the work will be so much better. Thank you.
So, thank you, Germane. I mean, that was beautiful, but the Q&A actually was also beautiful. I mean, the idea of forming a project, the idea of communicating a project, the idea of transforming a project across that time, I think it's incredibly valuable for all of our students to hear. So I really want to thank you. And I want to invite everyone again tomorrow in Loeb Library. The jury will reveal all their secrets and tell everything about Germane that you didn't hear already tonight. So I welcome you back tomorrow at 12:30 in the library. Thank you so much.